Okay, so I'll call the meeting to order. And this evening, I'd like to try a different acknowledgement. So it's with great humility we acknowledge the Snuneymuxw First Nation land. It is understood that the Snuneymuxw maintain profound connection to the land through their traditions and practices with an emphasis on reciprocity. Also tonight, we were gifted some vegan moose hide, and I'm going to pass it over to the co-chair to explain a bit about that campaign.
So thank you, Trustee O'Neill. So February 24th is Moose Hide Campaign Day. So the Moose Hide Campaign is a grassroots movement of Indigenous and non-Indigenous men and boys who are standing up against violence towards women and children. And wearing this moose hide signifies your commitment to honor, respect, and protect women and children in your life, and to work together to end violence against women and children. So for more information, there's a website I'll just share with the group. It's moosehidecampaign.ca. Back to the chair.
Perfect. Thank you, Trustee Keller. And perhaps we'll be able to put that up on our site or online tonight. So moving along, any additions to the agenda? Seeing none. Any deletions to the agenda? I would like to suggest that item 8.5, snow removal procedure, be moved to March business agenda, as well as item 10.1, trustee remuneration, so that I can learn how to say that word, to also be moved to the March business agenda. And just to give a bit of a background here, this is for the purpose of allowing us to have a more fulsome discussion on the heels of some fairly lengthy meetings and really intense presentation. We thought that we may be a little crunched for time to have that fulsome discussion. So I seek approval from the trustees. Any opposition? So all those in favor? Okay, opposed? Thank you. So we'll strike 8.5 and 10.1 from tonight's agenda to be moved to the March business agenda. Any change in order? No. And I'll ask for an approval of the agenda. Motion to approve the agenda. Moved by Trustee Stanley, seconded by Trustee Brezovich. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, I will now ask you to review the minutes from the December 11th meeting. And ask for a motion to move. Trustee Stanley. Oh, sorry. Focus. Moved by Trustee Stanley. Brezovich, seconded by Trustee Barron. Thank you. Okay, thank you. That will be noted on the record. All those in favor? All those opposed? Thank you. So tonight, agenda under presentations, I'd like to invite presenters from KPMG to come up, Lenora and Nayam, to present to us on the risk management overview. Just before the presentation starts, we wanted to also talk a bit about the process, mostly for presenters. Us trustees will fly up our hands at any given point. That's to get ourselves in the queue to speak to or ask questions about the presentation, but we as a whole are going to try to hold our questions till the end. So carry on through the presentation. This applies to all presentations tonight. And just also a friendly reminder to everyone to turn on your mics and turn off your mics when you're speaking. We've had a bit of feedback that we haven't been heard. So thank you.
Thank you for having us at tonight's meeting. My name is Lenora Lee. I'm the audit partner for the audit of your financial statements at SB 68. And I'm happy to have Naeem Rajabali here with me today. Naeem is a partner in our risk advisory group. We had been having some discussions with the management team around some of the work we've been doing in school districts, specifically around risk management. It's been a topic that's been brought up by various ministries, by the Auditor General, and a lot of school districts are starting to pay attention to this as part of either strategic planning or as budgeting. And so we thought it would be helpful to provide some information around the work that we're doing, as well as what we're seeing in school districts in general. Risk management has been discussed a fair amount at a number of industry and sector sessions, and so this presentation also includes some of the findings from other reports and or discussions at those meetings. So I'll turn it over to Naeem.
Thanks, Lenora. And thanks again for having me this evening. As Lenora said, my name's Naeem Rajabali. I'm a partner in our risk consulting practice based out of Vancouver, but do a fair bit of work on the island here. In risk management and internal audit is where I spend most of my time. So I thought I'd start with just a slide on kind of the background and objectives. And when we talk about ERM, I'll get into what the process is and what the concept of ERM is and what it can be used for as a school district. Like many school districts, I understand that you've articulated your priorities and your objectives and have a strategic plan or strategic focus. But really what ERM is about is understanding what risks and the types of risks that'll stop your school district from really reaching those objectives and trying to get across the line on some of those priorities. So I think when you really boil ERM or enterprise risk management down, it's really about identifying those risks, prioritizing them, and then as a school district thinking about potential mitigants and strategies to minimize the chance of those risks occurring. So that's really what ERM is in its simplest form. As Lenora alluded to earlier, a lot of guidance from ministries, especially, and a lot out of the Auditor General about school districts implementing or conducting an enterprise risk management assessment. So it's been a very busy time in this space. I've done this work for two school districts here on the island, as well as just starting my 12th in the lower mainland, and even up north I've done a couple as well too. So close to 15 school districts that have kind of that I've personally done this type of work for. So and that's been kind of over the last year and a half, 2 years. So definitely a lot of your peer school districts, both in size and kind of mandate, obviously adopting and thinking about ERM and going through this exercise. So again, I won't spend too much time on this slide, but really when you think about ERM and what it is and what it tries to achieve as a project or as an initiative, like I said, your objectives are your strategic objectives and what you're hoping to achieve as a school district, and the risks or anything that can stop you from meeting those objectives. And when we think about ERM and when you get into the execution and the concepts around ERM, it's really about thinking about certain risks, the likelihood of those risks occurring, and the impact that will have on your strategic objectives if those risks do occur. So as I allude to at the bottom there, ERM is really an approach to identifying, assessing, communicating, and finding a way to manage those risks in a palatable but also cost-effective and efficient manner. So what is ERM used for? And I won't go through each one of these, but I will say that when you think about ERM and what it empowers, and we have two kind of buckets here, what it is and like I said, what it empowers. I think what's really relevant and what's really top of mind for trustees and boards across all types of entities is that I think as a board member, it's really important to understand and get insight into some of the risks that your organization or your school district is facing. And a big part of your governance role as board members is understanding that level of risk, what your organization or management, for lack of a better word, is doing to mitigate those risks, and even constant reporting and refresh reporting on how those risks are trending, what we're doing to mitigate those risks, the actions, the resources we're putting forward to really understand them. And then, like many school districts, when you think about going through strategic planning and the exercise of revisiting or renewing or refreshing your strategic values or your priorities, again, for me, risk and understanding that go hand in hand. So it's, in my mind, you can't think about strategy and where you want to go, or revisit your strategy and where you want to go without thinking about risk and what might hinder you from getting there in terms of from a strategic objective perspective. What I will say is that a lot of, and I get a question about timeliness and when should we do this and when we shouldn't. I mean, I wouldn't say there's always a right point in time to do it, but I've seen school districts and organizations do this type of work during strategic planning, after strategic planning, before strategic planning. The cadence that I always give, or the advice that I always give, is that just to make sure that regardless of what you're thinking of and when you're doing strategic planning, risk has to be at the table and has to be considered. So that's a question that I often get. I won't spend too much time on the left there, but really, like I said, linked to strategy is a big piece. Continuous monitoring and measurement, I think that really comes into play when you think about the role of a trustee or the role of a board member in terms of getting insight into those risks. So these are some of the benefits of ERM. I think the biggest ones that I'd probably want to spend a minute or two on are and I won't get into risk appetite and strategy, but I'll get into seizing opportunities. I mean, I think where we've seen the most value of going through these exercises in the school district space and even in the higher education space is really understanding where school districts should consider to allocate resources to mitigating risks and where they shouldn't. So I think I've been through, and I'll get into a list of some of the risks that we're seeing in this space, and a lot of school districts I've had a couple of school districts say to me, look, I think we have an understanding of what our key risks are, and we always talk about it, and then something happens, or a year later they realize that they thought they understood them, but they hadn't prioritized them, they hadn't communicated them, they hadn't put them together in a kind of a robust program. So I think a lot of school districts will think that they understand at a high level what their top 3 or 4 risks are, but they haven't vetted them with management. Management hasn't agreed that that's the way they should be ranked, and more importantly, there's no challenge or loop or mechanism to challenge those risks from the board or from trustees. So I'd say that's where a lot of school districts kind of fall down. I also think that a big one at the end there is the improvement or the deployment of capital, and just understanding from a risk perspective, if our top risks really are our top risks, is there an opportunity to remove, deploy, and that's just not dollars, that's time, that's people, to move things around based on where our risks are and where they're trending. So how do you do this? I know this looks like a lot in terms of phases and an approach, but I really boil down the ERM process into 2 kind of key phases or 2 key pieces. And the first is really what we call risk identification, and that's meeting with a good cross-section of the organization as well as trustees or board members and really understanding what your thoughts are on key risks and getting that discussion going in a wholesome way and a robust way, and understanding just from an identification standpoint what you think those risks are. And then the second piece is really what I call risk prioritization, and that's typically held with management, where as management's going to be are typically the owners of these risks, and the board's role and trustees' role is to challenge management and govern and ask questions about how those risks are trending. Getting together with management and really prioritizing those risks. I mean, you could have a list of 20 or 25 risks, but no school district in the province is trying to put mitigation plans to all 20 or 25 risks. So it's really about management coming to a consensus around what they feel those top risks are, and then understanding what they want to do or what they don't want to do to mitigate those risks, and then in turn providing feedback to the board and reporting to the board on how those risks are trending. And then hopefully, I mean, the first school districts that I did this for probably about 2.5 or 2 years ago, the ones that have really adopted this are very good at understanding what they can do with it to keep it refreshed in terms of a reporting standpoint, in terms of how they ask or go to the table and ask for more resources or to take on certain initiatives or priorities, really using ERM as a tool to not only obviously understand risks, but also think about how you can align your priorities and what you want to get after and what you want to accomplish as a school district. So maybe I'll end here just with a couple of risks that by no means are these in any priority, but what we're seeing across the province in terms of the risks that are on our risk registers of school districts, like I said, across the province and even across the country. I mean, I don't think too many of these are foreign to you. I mean, obviously on the HR side, we're seeing a lot of recruitment and retention risk. Obviously, in some of the GBA and the Lower Mainland, huge on the teacher side in terms of affordability of living and the cost of living, and teachers not being able to live in the communities that they work at. Facilities is a big one for some of the bigger school districts, especially again in the Lower Mainland, in terms of they're at that stage where a lot of dollars are going towards renewal of facilities, taking away from programs in some instances and other things they'd like to accomplish as a school district. Competition is one that we're seeing, obviously, different delivery methods in education as well as independent schools and such. And then the last one I'd say is that's probably worth noting is IT and the use of IT in terms of not just delivering the curriculum, but the use of IT at school district offices in terms of reporting, in terms of access to information, in terms of understanding what they need from an IT perspective and managing that risk down. So I apologize, I know I rambled on there, but I try to stay within my time limit here, but happy to answer any questions, take any comments. Again, don't feel shy and don't feel that there's anything that's off limits. So.
Thank you. So, Trustee Brzezowicz?
Thank you, through the chair. How long would this cover process take?
How long? Yeah, good question. So it really depends. Like when I broke it down into those two pieces, the interview process, it just really depends on availability of staff and trustees. I've done it in a matter of weeks. Sometimes you could even compress it into a lower amount of time than that, and then just obviously booking the workshop, getting that, and turning around the deliverables. It really depends on availability of timing. So.
Trustee McKay?
Thank you. Through the chair, what's the typical cost of conducting it?
Yeah, so good question. We try, and I don't want to say it depends because that's a bit of a cop-out answer, but it does kind of depend in terms of the scale that you'd like to go about. And I've done this I'm actually literally just going through this process at Surrey School District or Surrey Schools right now, the biggest in the province. So they want to involve a lot of people in terms of the interview process. They want us to chat with folks that are at the highest level as well as kind of director to middle management level, so, and every trustee. So it really depends on how many trustees and how many members of management you want to involve. If I have a good idea and if we collectively kind of decide where we land in that in terms of interviews, that can scale up or scale down the cost. For the other two school districts that we've done this for on the island, that's where they were able to kind of to scale it in terms of, instead of interviewing, 17 or 20 people, they scaled it down to 7 or 7 to 10 or 7 to 11 people, which can get costs down as well too. So really depends on that. Yeah, I mean, I think if you were like, let's say if we were gonna to get it to an interview process that's maybe, let's say, cap it at 10 or 11, I think our fees will typically be a little bit lower than 20,000 in terms of total cost. So, but we've scaled it to double or triple that just based on more interviews. So that's kind of where we've landed for school districts of this size with that many kind of interviews. So, yeah.
Thank you. Trustee Stanley?
Thank you. So through the chair, I understand that this is recommended by the Auditor General, but I haven't read those recommendations in a while. So help me understand, because I'm a bit confused about what this process could tell us that, like, for example, that we don't already know, or that a good superintendent can't tell us based on best practices or based on the BCSDA kind of assessment of good governance. So how is this value added? How is this?
Yeah, no, great question. I think the biggest value comes from the prioritization of those risks. So I think that, every school district will maybe have some overlap on this list of what risks are out there, but in the 15 plus school districts that I've done this for, no school districts have had the same top 5. So I think really the unique nuances to your school district will be picked up in this exercise, and I think that consensus around what we really truly believe are our top risks is we have agreement on that, and that enables management and enable trustees to really steer the ship in terms of making sure we try to focus our attention and focus our dollars and focus our resources on those top 5 or 6 risks. So I think generally I wouldn't be truthful in saying that you probably understand what those risks are, but I would guarantee that that management doesn't collectively understand what the top 5 or how they should be prioritized or what they choose to, in a fulsome way, do about them. So,
Thank you, Trustee Barron.
I think actually my question might have been answered, but maybe I'll just ask it in case there's anything you want to add to it.
Yeah.
I was trying to understand, because you had said that these risks are presented to management. Management then decides which risks are priorities,
Yeah.
and how they would mitigate those and present that to the board. I was trying to understand how that's presented to management, those risks, and how that process would work of identifying what the priorities
yeah, so great question. So in that identification piece, which will involve trustees, as well as management, we kind of end up with a laundry list of risks, and that can be between 15 or 25 risks, and what we bring those all together into a workshop with management, and that's where the prioritization happens in that workshop, which is where we vote on kind of the impact and the likelihood of each of those risks. And that's really management's perception on the impact and likelihood of each of those risks, and then that's what gets presented in kind of a collective summary in terms of the top 5, the top 10, the top 15. So the consensus is really in that workshop with management where they vote and on the impact and likelihood of those risks occurring. So. And then what you guys as a board and trustees ask for in terms of reporting can take a number of forms. It's really what level of comfort you have and the ability that you want to have to discharge your roles as trustees and as a board, to the level of detail you want in those risks, who owns them, what are the mitigation plans that we have for them. A year later, once we said we're going to put a mitigant in place, have we actually done it? I mean, I think it's a huge part of governance to understand that. So,
Thank you, Trustee Stanley. And
Thank you. Sorry, I was actually trying to process the previous answer. So
Yeah.
if this is a bit repetitive, I apologize.
No, don't apologize.
I appreciate the clarity of your responses. So through the chair, I guess what I'm trying to understand is how is it that you make a recommendation for prioritization? So you talked about seizing opportunities. How do you do that without an education background? How does like KPMG come in? I get, Lenora coming in and telling us about our audit, but how is it that you, what does KPMG have to offer without the education background?
Yeah, so I mean, I've done this in the education, myself done this in the education space for close to 7 or 8 years. Was the first time I helped a school district or a university with this type of material. But I also say that I wouldn't obviously I wouldn't contest to know a school district better than its staff or better than you as trustees. But what we're really doing here is facilitating this process, right? It's not really an audit opinion that Lenore would give on our financial statements. It's us facilitating and putting that rigor and that infrastructure around helping management and yourselves identify and prioritize those risks. And I think we're knowing ERM as well as I know ERM and having done this at, like I said, 15 plus school districts, I think you couple those two facets together, and I think we've been able to provide a lot of value to our school district clients and help them in that space. But yeah, the beauty of it is that it's the most interesting part to me is that it's not my opinion, it's really your opinion as a school district as to where you stand from a risk perspective and the prioritization of those risks. So, but great question. I mean, I get that question a lot in terms of, well, what's your opinion on our risk? Well, it's not really my opinion. It's facilitating, gathering that opinion and putting it into a way that's palatable and understandable, right? So.
Thank you. Trustee Higginson.
Thanks for your presentation. So when I look at this list of what are the risks we're seeing in other school district clients' risk registers, when I look down the list, I think there's probably 5 that some people could say, well, we have no control over that anyway.
Good question, yeah.
So do you, in your identification of the risks, narrow down to what areas we have control over when you make the recommendations?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we do, and I think there's some aspects of identifying and knowing that we can't put mitigants towards it, but understanding that it isn't in a top 5 is part of the identification process. But how we choose to mitigate is a separate exercise in that aspect. So if we know there's a lot of macro-based, or I'd say, things that are out of control, government funding, things like that, even in the economy in certain other in aspects. So for the identification and prioritization piece, it can be there. We know it's a risk, and in some cases we choose to own it. But in some aspects of the ones that don't fall under that category, there's multiple mitigants that we put into a lot of risk registers for school districts. And then in some aspects it's interesting because you think some of these that you can't control, you'll do, or we'll see management put in other controls or other mitigants in other areas that, even though that risk is out of your control, you can do things on the mitigation front that could be in your control. So great question, but so we see a bit of both, I'd say. And a big part of it is not getting blindsided by this. Like, if you understand that something's out of your control, but you know it's in your top 5, or you know it's a high priority risk, you're not going to get blindsided by it. So.
Okay, I don't see any other hands, so thank you for your presentation.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
really,
thank you. Everyone's so
helpful,
engaged.
really
I love that. It's
clear,
great
and
to see.
thanks.
So thank you so much.
Thanks again.
Nice to
Have
see
a
you.
good night.
Thanks for having me.
So we now have Manager of Facilities and Planning, Kelsey Bakewell.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kelsey. We haven't met. It's nice to meet you. I'm the Manager of Facilities Planning. And so I've got a couple of presentations for you tonight. I just wanted to keep you guys in the loop what we're doing with a couple of projects. And so we'll start things off. It's a little bit out of order, but we're going to start off with Hammond Bay Elementary and follow up with our Solaire seismic upgrade. So I wanted to give you guys a quick overview of the project. I'm not sure how familiar you are with this. I assume that this has been presented to you in the past when it was in preliminary stages. So what we're looking at doing is we're looking to build an expansion onto Hammond Bay Elementary, and it will increase the current capacity from nominal capacity from 225 plus 40K students to 475 and 60K students. It'll be an addition of 10 classrooms, 1 kindergarten room, 1 special ed room, 1 multipurpose room. I want to make a note that the budget does not include renovations to the existing facility unless they are absolutely required for the expansion. And part of this is also relocating the 4 existing portables on site to make space for this expansion. Just to dig a little bit further into the details of the project, so there's a total of 13 rooms being constructed. We're also looking at the parking lot. We're going to add parking spaces, make it look like a parking lot, not just a gravel surface. And we're also looking at the entrance to the parking lot as well, and working with the city to see if there's some way that we can, I guess, help traffic flow, because it can get kind of congested there at times. We're also looking at tying into the existing building with a foyer or a link. We're planning on improving accessibility with consideration for diversity, and obviously ordering whatever equipment is required to open up the new space. We have a school-based design committee. You can see the members on there. And I just wanted to mention that this is on top of an interdepartmental team that we've got put together. The idea behind these committees and teams is to strive to get the input from all of the end users. A successful project is one that everybody's happy with at the end of the day. So you'll see that we've got members of learning services, members from the school. We've got a member from the PAC, a trustee rep, and some members from our operations group. I've also included a concept design. It might be a little bit hard to see. It's pretty small on there. The key things to note on here. So we're looking at a 2-story design. This is kind of a heads up. Not many people have seen this yet, and I wanted you guys to be one of the first. So we're looking at a 2-story design. An interesting thing. So you can see on the right hand of the paper, you can see the link to the school, the right hand top picture. And so the link will actually connect to the top floor of the building, and you'll go downstairs to the other floor. When we move to the next page, this will be something that'll look a little bit easier to understand. So so you'll note our 10 classrooms, our kindergarten room, special ed room, and then I guess the multi-purpose room or band room. I think that's the intention for it. So just a couple of notes on this drawing here. So some neat things that we're looking at is high ceilings in the band room. So it's going to be basically the entire height of the building, a 2-story band room. In the end, it's going to look really nice. We're looking at how we can incorporate the courtyard between the existing building and the new expansion into a kindergarten area. Something that maybe it'll be enclosed, maybe it'll be partially covered, something like that. These are ideas that we have bouncing around in our design committee. And something else that I'm paying particular attention to, I don't like long empty hallways. So connecting the building to the new expansion, we've got the foyer, the link between the two buildings. We're coming up with some ideas. We want to make that look special. We want to make it look different. Maybe it's something, something to learn. Anyway, we've got a few ideas in there too. So I don't want an empty hallway. I don't want an empty space. I've also attached the schedule. So just to sum this up, so we're currently in the design development stage of this project. We're planning on going to tender in October, November, and award a contract for construction by the end of the year. The construction will take about a year, and we should be able to occupy, if things are going according to the schedule, February 2022. I've also attached so the budget for this project, just a shade under $16 million, and I've broken it out. So it consists of $1.25 million from district capital. We've got a construction budget. The ministry breaks all of this down. We have to, when we submit our PDR, we break it down into different types of costs. So the construction budget, which includes the actual construction, the owner's costs. So that's our design fees for the architects. Supplemental items. So these are things that we recognize that there's going to be some earthworks required for the project, but we're not quite sure how much. We didn't know how much would be required up front. So we submit a number and we will be funded for the amount that we use. Then there's escalation, because these things take time to get out and construct. And then risk items. We may encounter hazmat or something like that. Undefined things that will be covered for once we uncover them. And then just an enrollment executive summary. So the project is meant to address demand for French immersion spaces, loss of spaces due to the class size and composition, and capacity issues from surrounding schools. It's getting busy in that end of the city, and we recognize that. Do you guys have any questions or comments about Hammond Bay?
Thank you, and I will scan the room for hands. Is that a hand, Trustee Keller? So I'll let Trustee Keller speak first, and Higginson.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. My understanding was that the Hammond Bay facility is taking advantage of some kind of a heat recovery system from the treatment plant. Is that correct?
Yes, that was not related to this project. That was project, I don't know, a couple of years ago I think that project started. Brian, you might be able to...
Through the chair, it was a C&C project. It was approved about 2 years ago, I believe now. This is in the third year of it.
So my question is, to follow up, what sort of green technologies or infrastructure does this project include?
So at this point in time, we're still we're just finishing the concept design. We actually, on Friday next week, we're having our first meeting with the engineers and the architects. So what we're looking at with this, we want to make it, so there is no ministry requirement for specifics on making this carbon neutral. But our plan is to look at as many things as we can. I mean, we may not be adding the solar batteries or anything, but or things like that, carbon neutral plans. But we're going to make this carbon neutral ready. So we will include things like the connections to, if we wanted to add solar panels to the roof or what have you. These are things they haven't come up yet in our design, because we're just finishing the concept design stage. So they will be addressed, but that is one of the things that we're paying attention to.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Higginson.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to ask a question that might be awkward because I think it's not one that you can answer, but I'm just trying to figure out when Hammond Bay is identified as an H1, why the ministry is not doing seismic upgrades at the same time. Does that...
That is a good question.
Don't feel pressure to answer.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I can.
Has anyone?
So this might be one that has to be looked into.
Sorry, Brian.
Okay.
Through the chair,
Yeah.
there is a priority list with the government,
Yeah.
and it's not identified as the priority to get at this time.
Can I have a follow-up? It feels like we have two different, knowing how it works at the ministry, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe they've just been explicit with you and you can just cut me off if that's correct, but I know that we have a capital department that works on one thing and a capital department that works on seismic, and I'm just wondering if the question's been asked, like, should we, while we're ripping the school apart, seismically upgrade it as well at the same time?
Through to the chair, we can certainly ask the question. We're really leaving the original building alone. We're not even touching it. You're right, there would be an economy of scale if we could get the funding from the government at this time to do the seismic. We can absolutely ask the question.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
Trustee Stanley.
Thank you. So through the chair to, I actually don't know who. I don't know if I've seen this number before about the capacity. I was meaning to find it. Thank you, that makes my life easier. And I'm surprised that we're intending to increase school capacity beyond 500, just because, from what we've talked about. By the way, hi Kelsey, nice to meet you. What we've had conversations before about that 500 is marked as, in this type of environment for elementary schools, to be the point at which, if you go above that, learning outcomes go down. So I'm wondering why it is that we are designing a school that is above 500, given that we, at least the research indicates that learning outcomes go down when at that size. But again, I don't know who to.
I can,
Well,
I'll
let's try the
start.
presenter.
I can start. So I guess from a facilities point of view, we've got a demand. We've got our enrollment numbers. The schools in that area are increasing. So from a facilities point of view, it makes the most sense economically to do it this way. It's obviously it's the most efficient way to do it. I mean, we've got one construction project that can technically increase our capacity to take the strain off of our enrollment numbers. Now there might be somebody else might have to jump in here as well, but I guess so. When the school opens, it's not going to be opening at full capacity. All of these classrooms are not going to be jam-packed full. The idea was to add in the additional daycare space so we could give parents a bit more choice and start moving children up from kindergarten. I'm not sure. Somebody else will probably want to add something to that.
Through the chair, and thank you to Kelsey for partially answering the question. What we're looking at is we have a wait list for French immersion programs that we have a historical perspective on. What I can give you right now is we've got a wait list for the 2019-20 school year, so our current school year. There were 55 kindergarten students and 26 grade 1 students, because we do intakes both at kindergarten and grade 1, who are on a wait list for French immersion programming. Going into the 2020-2021 school year already, and again, we just opened the registration in January. We're into February, and we have gone through the process of registration intake for kindergarten with the lottery aspect. So those students are already accounted for. There are presently 88 students in kindergarten who are on a wait list for French immersion kindergarten, and 16 students on the wait list for an intake at grade 1 level. So through this project, partially what we're looking at is addressing a community desire, school of choice for French immersion programming. The other aspect to that is what we're looking at in terms of need in that general area, and the PDR, or the project definition report, does outline in there the growing demand within the English stream in the North End, and how we are becoming pressured as a district for spaces, so capacity utilization for spaces within the English stream. And what we do know, and we've gone back a number of years in terms of looking at where students are coming from out of our North End schools that are feeding into Hammond Bay, into the kindergarten, and so we do know that by opening up additional kindergarten spaces and continuing that through the years, we are going to relieve a lot of the pressure from the English stream North End schools through this project.
Thank you, Deputy Superintendent. Hopefully that answers the question. I'll move on. Trustee Higginson, and then I have Trustee Keller. Did I miss anyone? Oh, did I crossed you off? Sorry, Trustee Barron. Crossed you off before, I thought.
Thanks. Could you clarify, please? I know that Trustee Higginson touched a little bit on the seismic, and it says here that the budget doesn't include all these other aspects here, the renovations, the upgrades, operational improvements to existing facility, and so on. Do we know if any of those things are going to be necessary as part of this project? Are there, I'm just wondering, is there any costs associated that we're aware of that are going to be in addition to the local capital contribution, there's the word, that we've already made?
So things that might be identified would be with the connection between the two buildings. There might be some work that's required there just because we're basically moving the entrance to the school. That type of stuff may happen. We may have to look at changing or upgrading a PA system or a fire alarm based on what we end up with a design. But those should be the only things those are the only things that I could think of that would be affected by this, just because this building, although it's connected to the existing building, is kind of a standalone thing.
Okay. Now, Trustee Higginson.
Thanks.
Mike?
Oh, thank you. You mentioned, so one quick question and then a follow-up to it. Gender neutral washrooms, it's hard to tell. Are those gender neutral washrooms in the drawing?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then my other one is, you mentioned daycare space, and I'm wondering if, knowing what the province is doing, if there is a dedicated, I don't see it on here, a dedicated daycare space being added on to the school.
There is, sorry, I did mention it.
Well, you mentioned daycare as an ability to utilize those classrooms, and that we could have daycare on site. And that we could move those kids through, but I don't see daycare, and I know that the province is pushing for districts to have daycare in new builds, so.
So there is, there's a daycare on site right now that I believe uses the band portable. Now, this build will not, in this design, this build does not have a daycare space. I'm not sure down the road what might end up happening, but there is a multi-purpose room, and so currently the daycare uses the band portable, and in this case we've got a multi-purpose room that's unofficially being dedicated as a band space. So there's an assumption that the daycare could use that multi-purpose space.
Sorry, can I have a follow-up on that? Just for clarification. So I'm not talking about before and after school space, after school care, I'm talking about dedicated daycare space, and the province is on a push for, and our district has received a grant and is working with the city, and I know that part of the ministry's new build initiatives is also to have dedicated daycare space, not before and after school space, but in new builds of schools. Now, this isn't a new build, so I'm wondering if the question has been asked as well about having space put on it for daycare.
In the capital funding agreement, there isn't money in the budget for a daycare according to the capital funding agreement that we got from the ministry.
Can we ask that question? Does anyone know if we've asked the question and why daycare is not being included in this particular edition?
Through the chair, yes, we have asked the question. No, I do not have a specific answer as to why it's not being included. What I can say in reference to your acknowledgement that we are working with the city and other municipalities right now in terms of a consultant who is looking for or working on, I guess, a report to provide to us in terms of where the demand for daycares is. We are continuing through that process. We have not received that information yet. And what I can say is that currently we have staff that are working on application for child minding spaces potentially through our school district. But at this time, Hammond Bay has not been identified as one of those sites.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Keller?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, through the chair. So I'm just looking at the student projection numbers, I suppose, for the project, and it made me start thinking about questioning, we're basically doubling the student population. So we have a student population there now, capacity, I guess, of about 265 students, and that would go up over 500 students. So did we look at the possibility, given what we've heard from Mr. Davies about capacity issues in the north end from the English stream as well as demand for the French stream, whether that actually made more sense to build a new school and what their economies of scale would have meant for that, instead of doubling the capacity of the existing school?
Okay, there seems to be a number of people that want to speak to this. But I'm going to defer to the presenter and Deputy Superintendent.
Thank you. Through the chair, again, we are not looking at doubling the size of the current school. What we are looking at doing, the current configuration of the school is over capacity in that we have 5 portable classrooms attached to this school presently. So we would be replacing those 5 portable classrooms and then having additional 5 classrooms that are added as we move kindergarten through the school. Yeah.
Yeah, there's 5 points.
Yeah.
Rumblings, trustees, questions? Oh, Superintendent?
No.
Okay. No further questions on this aspect. Now, is there a motion? Kelsey, are you going to move into the other presentation as well? Or?
Yes, yes, I am. All right. Oh, no, wait. Oh, work.
Yeah, because you'll see them all come into kindergarten, and it'll take a few years to get through that.
All right, round 2. So the Solaire Seismic Mitigation Project. So similar to the last one, I just wanted to give you guys an update and keep you in the loop what's going on. So the overview of this project. So this is not yet approved by the ministry, and so part of the reason why I wanted to make this presentation to you today is because there's a couple of action sheets that are part of the agenda, and so it was a good idea, I thought, to keep you in the loop here. So we submitted a PDR to the Ministry of Education back in December for funding, and so the PDR is for a seismic upgrade to address the SPIR findings, which you can see on the table that I've attached here. For Solaire. So this project in particular is an interesting one. So it's kind of 2 projects in one. So we're looking at the seismic upgrade to Solaire as well as the renovation of Woodlands Secondary School to be used as a swing space for this project, as well as potentially for projects for more seismic upgrades down the road. We've got a bit of a 10-year plan for the use of Woodlands. So with this, there's 2 separate design contracts, and there's going to be 2 separate construction management contracts as well. And so that's why you'll note there's the 2 action sheets that are attached to this. So the idea behind those action sheets is Herald Engineering was the engineer that was used to create the SPIR. They're a leader in seismic upgrade design, and so we thought, based on that and their involvement already in this project, that it would be best to have them, I guess, lead the design for the seismic upgrade. Now we also have an action sheet for Bradley Shuya Architects, who created the PDR and worked with Herald Engineering on the SPIR. And we are hoping to have them lead the design for the renovation of Woodlands. So some details for this project. So this is strictly a seismic upgrade. So we're looking at numerous upgrades, so finishing door frames and walls, electrical upgrades, everything to bring the risk rating from a high rating down to a low rating, obviously. We're looking to retrofit the building from the inside out, which is kind of unique. Normally you would go from the outside, but after looking at a cost analysis, it was found to be cheaper to go from the inside out on this project. So we're going to be reinforcing load-bearing walls, reinforcing joists and frames to make this a lower rating on the seismic risk chart. We're also looking at an enhanced life safety upgrade for the gym. So the idea behind that is to increase the chances of occupying the gym immediately following a seismic event. So that would be removal of all asbestos containing materials. So after an event, this gym could be used as an emergency center or something like that. We're also looking wherever possible to make improvements such as GBA plus and inclusivity as often as possible within the scope of the work. And then, so this was the Solaire scope. So as I mentioned, there's the second scope of this, so that's the Woodlands renovation for the swing space upgrade. So
Kelsey, can I just pause you for a second?
Course.
There's an acronym here. I think some of us are wondering. GBA, what does that stand for?
Gender-based analysis plus, I believe.
Okay,
Yes.
okay, thank you. Oh, we
Oh,
found
sorry,
another
which one?
acronym.
Around the first page, spurs.
Oh, the SPIR. So that's the Seismic Project Identification Report. And so the SPIR, what that is that was a report that was created that we based all of our risk ratings for all of our schools for seismic upgrades. So that was an engineer going out to site. He produced a report based on what the there's a bunch of different things that it's based on, but things like what were the building materials, how many stories was this, that information was put into the SPIR, the Seismic Project Identification Report, to create the risk rating for all of our schools that we're now basing our upgrades off of. All right.
Thank you very much, ABC.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, there's a lot of them. Okay. So Woodlands, as I imagine everybody knows, is a secondary school, and we're looking to renovate it to use as a swing space for, in this case, an elementary school. So we're going to be looking at, the renovation is going to include classroom and washroom conversions. We're going to be adding some elementary play structures. Obviously, there's going to be some different security things, so fencing, access, lighting. We have to look at upgrading the PA and fire alarm system, and we are also looking at busing to Woodlands for these students to use this as the swing space. I've attached a concept design for this, although it doesn't, there's not a whole lot changing. So just briefly, the reason I added this just shows, so what we're doing is we're using a portion of Woodlands for this project. So this scope of work will renovate the space highlighted in green on the paper to be used for this swing space. Now, down the road, if we're looking at a school, if we're looking at using this as a swing space for a larger school, obviously we can accommodate using more space in Woodlands. I've got a schedule on here as well. So as I said, we're currently waiting on ministry approval. The reason behind attaching the action sheets to this agenda was to basically waste no time. So right now we're, according to our schedule that we've got on the bottom, we are, I guess, running close to being behind schedule already, and it's not due to our fault. I shouldn't be saying fault. Anyway, it's still with the ministry. We expected to hear back already, and we haven't. So the idea behind this is to, as soon as we hear back from the ministry, be able to pull the trigger on the design of this so we don't waste any more time. So just to summarize the schedule, so we'd be looking at beginning the design and following up with construction of Woodlands almost immediately. The idea behind that is obviously to get that to a point where we can then move students into that to be used as a swing space while we construct or while we renovate for a seismic upgrade at Solaire. So we're planning on having the seismic upgrade project out to tender for construction by the end of this year, and then we're looking at about a year's worth of time to complete that project, in which case then we can move the students back in and life will go back to normal. The budget for this one, just shy of $12 million, so similar to the last one, we've got a construction budget our owner's costs, supplemental items, escalation and risk. I can go through that again quickly for an example if you need, or you can just
Was it good?
move on. All right, well, that wraps that one up. Pretty straightforward. Fire away.
Okay, thank you. And I've already started a list here. I've got Trustee Keller and Trustee Barron. Did I see any other hands go up? Now I have. Over to you.
Thank you, as I see my pen on the ground. So thank you for the presentation. So I guess I have a two-parter, if I may. So is this the first time the board has seen the proposal for Woodlands to be used in the swing space?
I am not sure, to be honest.
I think
so.
Superintendent might.
Okay, so that leads to my main question, is how is it determined that Woodlands was the best fit for a swing space, and does it make sense from a cost and business case perspective in the long term to invest in improvements in a facility designed for secondary students, especially when we have elementary facilities that are currently not being used? So I just want to understand, help me make a decision. Do we have some comparators in terms of some of our other elementary facilities that perhaps could also be improved for swing spaces that are already designed as elementary spaces? And what are the costs involved? So I don't want to, that part's challenging. I really do want to support and help us move forward on the Solera seismic upgrades, but at the same time I need to be able to understand why we'd be converting space when we already have elementary space, and what are the costs involved, and what's the business case for that?
There's a few different parts to that, but I you know what, I'm going to pass this off to the back here. Brian will be able to touch on that.
Through the chair, there was a couple, so we're talking about maybe the elementary schools that are around there. We'd be looking at closed elementaries. So we're talking Dufferin and Rutherford. Rutherford is included, most likely, for swing space in the future. So right around the Woodlands, and we're trying to group it by where the schools are, make it so they don't have a long bus ride, basically. Couple of reasons between Woodlands and Dufferin. Woodlands has the space. Dufferin is currently, not full, but it's currently occupied. In the end, it really came down to the fact that with Woodlands having the space and it not being in the long-range plan for any improvements, whereas Dufferin actually is going to be in the long-range plan for possible improvements, and Dufferin may not be able to accommodate all the schools that we would do a seismic upgrade in that area. It's long-range for us. It's long-range for us as well. This is probably over the next 10 to 15 years that we're going to be doing seismic upgrades. The first year is the development of Woodlands. After that, we just continue to use Woodlands as the swing space. It just made sense to go to Woodlands where there wasn't any plans over the next 10 to 15 years to develop it really into anything else, whereas Dufferin there was.
Thank you, Brian. So there were a few questions in there. Do you feel?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I guess I could just touch on, so as a spoiler alert, we are looking at more seismic upgrades and using additional swing spaces in other schools that have been closed, and so without going into too much detail, we have looked at Rutherford as well.
Thank you for that. Trustee Barron.
Thank you. I guess my questions are a little bit following Trustee Keller's in some capacities that, of course, this is great that we're looking at seismically upgrading Solera. This is an exciting project, glad we're doing work around this, and I can appreciate that we need swing space. I'm just trying to understand some of the logistics around the decision-making process that's, happening right now, in particular with us starting our long-range facilities plan right now with our community and getting feedback from our community. There's a lot of work that's being done, and so I'm just trying to understand the long-term thinking around this. In particular, when I'm looking at this conceptual design at Woodlands, I'm trying to understand what in that space is currently occupied by learning alternatives. And I guess there's just so many interconnected pieces here, as you can appreciate, that when we make a change to one, then it impacts another. And it's very complex, which I appreciate we'll be looking at through this process. And so I'm just wanting to understand what our plan is, because as of right now, our Learning Alternatives program is currently in Woodlands. And so have we considered that through this plan?
I believe that was considered in this particular instance. Now, I can't speak for further projects in here, but I believe that we did pay attention to that when we were looking at using Woodlands as a swing space. And as you can see, I mean, we are not using the building in entirety in this particular case.
Deputy Superintendent?
Chair, thank you. Yes, that was a consideration that was brought forward. I had been involved with Pete Sabo, our Director for Facilities, and in looking at the swing space that is being proposed here for Solera Elementary, as I'm sure everyone in the room is familiar, Woodlands is a sort of U-shaped, 3 main wings attached to the school, and there's a separation from the proposed swing space and the wing that the learning alternative programs are attached to. The other aspect here in terms of the courtyard, in the center of Woodlands, the proposed classrooms that we're looking at are predominantly on the whatever that road is that Strathmore side of Woodlands, so there wouldn't be disruption coming to these classrooms for any elementary school, and they would be sharing gymnasium space. So right now there's provision, there's a dividing wall between the two, so we have two separate gymnasiums there. The Learning Alternatives program uses one side, and the other side could be utilized by an elementary school.
Can I just follow up? Sure. Have a follow-up question to that?
Yeah.
Yes, and to clarify, the CTC program would also continue in Woodlands in its current capacity?
So the introduction to trades program is operated through Learning Alternatives, and it would continue in the courtyard area. There's also been discussion about if there is disruption, that we could be locating that on a different portion of the property, of the Woodlands property. It's large enough for us to be able to do that. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Higginson.
Thank you. Thanks for all the information. This is more of a learning question. I'm wondering two, but I'll ask one and then I'll put myself back on the list.
Done.
There's been learning alts talk, and I know that you're talking about them being located in a different part of the building, but there's also some shared aspects of the building that they utilize. I know every video we've seen them using the gym for all sorts of different things, and so what does this do to the ability of learning alts to continue to operate in the good way that it is when we're going to have an elementary school in there that would probably be also utilizing some of those spaces at the same time? Has there been discussion about that? Have we thought about that? What's it going to look like for them?
Through the chair. Yes, there has been consideration of that. Again, and I'll go back to a question that was asked earlier and address Trustee Higginson's question as well at the same time. One of the considerations here for the Woodlands site versus another site such as Dufferin is the limitations that come with a school the size of Dufferin. So as we're going through the years of seismic upgrades, the schools that we're looking to provide swing space for will vary in size, and Dufferin may not be able to accommodate every school that's going through the seismic process. The other aspect is, again, we are looking at the Strathmore side for any swing space, and there, as you look at the map here, there's provision for additional classrooms to be utilized along with office space, so that's one of the key pieces. It's the connecting wing that's going to separate the two, other than, again, the dividing gymnasium. So learning alternatives can be standalone in the one wing, and the swing space can be standalone in the other. playground equipment and so forth would be located obviously in a location that's going to be accessible to the elementary school that's utilizing that swing space.
Mr. Zvier?
Thank you. Through the chair. These costs that are currently going on, are they absorbed by the school district through their capital, local capital, or through their capital project? Or will there be a reimbursement from the ministry at time of awarding it? Because I know there's a lot of cost going on, and there has not seen, is my view from anything, that there's funding coming in for these additional costs that are going on. So how are we paying for these projects right now? And will that money be returned to the district for their use? Thank you.
As part of the ministry funding, the design costs are reimbursable through the project. So once we receive our funding, we can essentially pay ourselves back through the project for those upfront costs.
So Trustee Keller, then have Trustee Stanley and Trustee Higginson. I'm doing this now.
So thank you through the chair. I really want to hear from our community on what they have to say about using this space as a swing space. And I'm wondering what our plans are to engage the community to get feedback.
I will, I'm not sure, to be quite honest.
Superintendent Sewell?
We haven't engaged the community to see what their thoughts are. I think the one piece that maybe was not clear enough was that we have 22 seismically challenged schools right now. We'll be doing seismic upgrades for as Brian said, the next 10 or 15 years. At probably, we're hoping at a couple a year, in which case we will require 2 buildings for swing space. I'm assuming that those will, at some times, we'll have both of those occupied at the same time. We didn't have very many options. We do have plans for Dufferin Crescent, and we have some school programs in there right now as well. Montessori is in there. It's about 100 odd students.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Stanley.
Thank you. So through the chair. I would like to hear a little bit about plans to address age difference dynamics. We're talking about elementary students mixing with all the way up to, I would imagine, grade 12. So we talked a little bit about they would be in different areas of the school, but what about, how is it going to be addressed about, pick up and drop off times? And so I'm just kind of curious about how that, that will work, given that there might be some kind of, well, there's great developmental differences, right? And there's great differences associated with interest due to those developmental differences.
Through the chair, part of the project will be putting physical separations in place. And then, as always, there is supervision during recess, lunch, and second recess as well. But fencing will be put in place to separate the outside. Inside, there should be no overlap, other than we're using a shared gym, and even that is walled off. So I would expect there's physical barriers in place. There should be no interaction in the fields. Drop off and pick up. That's something we're going to have to work on. That's going to be a full elementary school painful pick up and drop off as it is at every school.
If I could, I always think of those as opportunities. We often take our secondary students down to elementary programs for mentorship, and so there might be something of benefit there as well.
Thank you.
Through the chair, it'd be great to see some of the elementary kids, maybe they're interested in CTC, getting involved in the portable rebuilds. I don't know if that opportunity is there, but it sure would be great.
I'm just envisioning that, okay. I have Trustee McKay, I'm going to add in, Trustee Higginson and Trustee Barron have already spoken to this.
Most likely that's true.
Thank you. Through the chair, how much has been spent to date on design and planning?
I'm just trying to remember, I actually looked at this earlier today. I don't want to take a guess and tell you the wrong number, and I did look at this earlier. Off the top of my head, it was around 80,000 in total between the SPIR and the PDR.
Sorry, can I just get a clarification on that? Because that's both for Solaire and the Woodlands project?
Yes, yes.
You read my mind, Trustee Higginson. I was going to ask for that same clarification. You're next on the speakers list as well.
Thank you. I think this is what Mr. Spear was asking, but I'm just going to ask it again. And I want to say, I think we are, as a district, in a fortunate position to be able to have the use of swing space. I think it will speed up our seismic upgrade process. It makes our students safer during the processes that we're on. So I do appreciate that we have the ability to have swing space, and I appreciate that we even have the ability to have discussions about where that swing space should be. So I think that, you know, we're pretty fortunate to be in that position. So just to be clear, the cost for us to build, design, and do the actual renovations of the swing spaces, are they going to be covered by the seismic upgrade process that we have to go through?
Yes.
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 Okay, thank you.
Trustee Barron.
Thank you. Quick question, and I don't think you clarified, but we've spoken about the Woodlands swing space site. There was a mention of Rutherford being a secondary swing space site. What does that look like? Can we get some more information around that?
So very similar to this, you'll probably see me at the next meeting with a very similar presentation for Pleasant Valley. And so that has also been identified as a high priority project for a seismic upgrade. We are lagging by about a month and a half from this project. Anyway, Pleasant Valley has also been submitted more recently to the ministry. Once we hear back from them, we're kind of going through the last phases of the last draft, I guess, of the PDR before it's brought up the ranks in the ministry. The idea was to use Rutherford as a swing space for Pleasant Valley. And similar to this, we've got a plan in place between the 20-odd schools that we've got, seismic upgrades required. We've got a plan in place between Rutherford and Woodlands to just basically use them as a revolving door for these schools. As one school is complete, the students will move back in and we'll move the next group into the swing space.
Thank you. Trustee Keller?
Thank you. So we have our long-range facilities plan process on the horizon, and we've heard tonight, and hopefully I got the number right, but we have 22 facilities that are in need of seismic upgrades of our 37-ish, I believe. So my question, and I'm not sure who to ask this to through the chair, is can we or should we not also, in addition to the work that we're being asked to consider here, include a discussion during the long-range facilities plan around developing a strategy for seismic mitigation and what that swing space looks like, where it is, get some feedback from the community. Because I feel this is a bit, this isn't the right term, and I apologize if this comes across the wrong way, but disjointed, in that we're getting this information and sort of learning about where the swing space is, but not really having a lot of information and feedback on this and being asked to make a decision. So ideally, we'd have an opportunity to bring this to the community and get some feedback, and maybe the long-range facilities plan would be that opportunity.
I can respond.
So, if you've got an answer or a suggestion to that, that would be great.
Well, just to respond to say there is an opportunity for community input on all we're doing with facilities. So when we have our open house, they can weigh in, and then we're going to put a plan together, and they can weigh in on that as well.
Okay.
Can I follow up on that, please? So just to follow up, if the board supports the recommendations that we've been asked to consider, is there time for staff to put together some information specific to this project in time for the open house?
Because, so this isn't approved by the ministry yet, so there is some time before, there would be time depending on when this open house is. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that date. But we do have time between now and the completion of the design of the renovation. I mean, this isn't something that, no, okay. Okay, yeah. So, I mean, at this point in time, the project isn't approved by ministry. There's still going to be a design phase, which will take the course of a few months, in which point in time, I mean, we could still get input on what we're doing with the site. Yeah.
Thank you. Trustee McKay.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just wanting to clarify. So, thank you for the presentations. It's a lot of information, and I really appreciate that. Just sort of circling back around. So what you're asking of us tonight is to pass the motion so that you can hit the ground running when you hit that last phase with the ministry. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. So at this point in time, it could be tomorrow, or it could be a month from now. I'm not sure until we hear back from the ministry on whether or not we've got the funding agreement for this project. And so the intention was, if for some reason it is tomorrow, yeah, I'd be able to hit the ground running. I wouldn't have to present this to you at the next business case and therefore lose, weeks in what we could be doing to get this project moving.
Trustee Higginson and then Trustee Stanley.
Thank you.
I'm going to attempt to do last call for speakers on this one.
It feels like every time somebody speaks, there's more questions that come up, so I apologize. So I'm going to try to make this in the form of a question. My understanding right now about this whole process is, one, our district is currently operating without a long-range facilities plan. Parallel to that process is our 22 seismic projects, which we've identified some as priorities in our capital plan. So we have a capital plan that this board has identified with priorities. So what happens now is the ministry looks at that and says, yes, no, based on their priorities as well and how well our priorities match up. So I hear concern, and I think it's fair from my colleagues about the disjointedness, like, wow, we're in a long-range facilities plan, but then we're kind of doing this over here. But my concern is that any attempt to try to mush these processes together will result in a slowing down of the possibility of seismically upgrading.
Where's the question?
I'm getting there. Some of our schools. So what I think we're being asked to do is to approve these two recommendations in order to stay in line with our current capital plan, while at the same time we will then address these issues that are coming up through our long-range facilities plan the best we can. But in the meantime, we have a capital plan, and we have a ministry that's moving along with seismic programs. So we risk the opportunity of getting bumped out of the queue if we slow it down. Is that correct? There you
go. Yes. So yes. So right now so the ministry approved, or I shouldn't say approved. The ministry asked us to proceed with the PDR for these two projects based on last year's capital plan. Last year's, I might be getting my years mixed up. Based on it would have been the 1920 capital plan, and so that's where this PDR. They said, yeah, go ahead. So now we've submitted that PDR. We're looking for funding there. Now, In March, there'll be another, another new year, so new money will be on the table from the ministry, and so they may contact us based on last year's capital plan submission to proceed with another project, maybe another 2 projects, we're not sure yet. So this is happening in parallel with us working on this long-range facilities plan. So our seismic upgrades will become part of this long-range facility plan, but that's exactly it. We didn't want to have to wait until the long-range facilities plan is complete before we start looking at, obviously, a very important upgrade to these schools.
Thank you, and I'll say I always give you Trustee Higginson a tough time there, but that was a really good question / statement / clarification. So, Trustee Stanley.
So thank you. Through the chair, I'm going to acknowledge that we have an entire other conversation to have, which is the nature of these motions. And I have questions around that as well, which I've been holding off because I view those as separate conversations. So I guess I'm looking for some direction about the fact that this is really a 2 conversation issue. And how is it that we want to proceed with that 2 conversation challenge?
So as the chair, I was ready to start to contemplate the 2 motions that are put before us today, and that we would have a separate conversation on that, and thank our presenter, who will be available if need be. So I'm entertaining the motion that are before us and asking our thanking our presenter. So, Trustee Keller.
I'd like to move the motion.
Okay.
That the Business Committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District Number 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, directs staff to award the contract to Herald Engineering Limited for the design and construction supervision for the seismic mitigation project, Solaire Elementary School, subject to funding and the successful negotiation of a service agreement.
Okay. Do I have a seconder? Trustee Fitch. Okay. Oh, all those, no, open discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, through the chair. Sorry, I'm looking at our staff back there. I'm wondering if they have... Okay, I'll move on. Flipping through some pages. So yes, thank you. I move the motion. I do strongly support the seismic upgrades to Solaire. So I will be recommending approval, voting in favor of this motion.
Thank you, Trustee Keller. So I had Trustee McKay and Stanley, but it was a bit of a tie. I think I didn't see you send that first.
I don't have a question.
Oh, well, that you made that easy. Okay, Trustee Stanley.
So through the chair, so for me, this motion is fundamentally about circumventing, for lack of a better word, our tendering process. So although we've talked about the merits of the project and the nature of the project, from what I understand of this is that it's asking for a variance in our tendering process. And I have concerns about that. So I'm going to just launch into those concerns. It's not that I have a problem with the project, but I do think that the tendering process is there for a reason, and that we have policies and procedures for similar reasons, which is to ensure best practices and offer protections against risk, right? So the reason, one of the reasons a tendering process exists is to get the best, the lowest price possible, but it's also, to avoid nefarious business practices. And it's not that I'm saying that nefarious business practices are occurring, but the reason that we have policies, procedures, and a tendering process, which is the standard of which we, across all government procedures and major businesses on major financial decisions, that is the standard through which these decisions are made. So I'm really uncomfortable with proceeding in a way that avoids or sidesteps our process that is meant to be a safeguard. So help me out, please, because I'm really stuck on this. It's not that I want to vote against the project, but I don't feel comfortable avoiding or sidestepping safeguards. So someone tell me why this is a good idea, please. Or why, what is the motivation? Maybe that's a better way of putting this. Thank you.
So I guess, oh, sorry.
I saw Brian's hand as well, so, but I'll leave it to you to decide that.
So through the chair, you're absolutely correct with tendering procedures for goods and materials and for construction. Typically, when you're tendering for professional services, and I've been through a bunch of these where we've done professional services, engineers, lawyers, that sort of thing. Typically, price isn't the determining factor. It'll be experience and availability and being able to meet schedules. If everything's equal at that point, then you have to say, for instance, two companies that are absolutely equal, then you actually open the tenders and look and see what their dollar values are. This is professional services only. So in this case, when we actually went out to the SPIR, we looked at availability, we looked at experience, and who has actually worked. Herald Engineering has actually worked and created the new BC building code. We've got probably the best engineering firm in BC to deal with as far as our seismic goes. We were looking at it for an architect, and it was experience as well as availability, and that's where we ended up with, or that's where we got. And Brett Shuey is well experienced, fantastic architect. He was available, and technically we could go to the, and perhaps if I could recommend, we would maybe not recommend, but suggest we could look at that in our further down the road to our further seismic, that we could at some point go out to tender for professional services. But at this point, I have no hesitation in the process that we've used to get the professional services we have in place now. Not just hang on.
I'm scanning the room. Looks like, oh. Give too much. No. Trustee Barrett.
Thank you, through the chair. Could you just expand on that just a little bit? Your comment about no hesitation with going through that process in the future, but being comfortable with the process right now. I'm just trying to understand that a little bit more. If this process that was undertaken right now is the best process, wouldn't it be in our best interest to continue that process? It just feels a little, I'm just trying to understand what you meant by that comment. Why would we use it to process later, but then recommend this process for this time around?
Through the chair, sorry. I was suggesting that if that was the board's desire, that we could look at it in the future. I wouldn't want to, if we tried to interrupt this process now and bring another architect online that didn't write these PDRs, that didn't write the SPIRs, we're putting ourselves into a fairly tough spot. It would probably delay the project a fair amount. But to actually go into a brand new project and having tendered out professional services, then they're starting right at the ground level would be not so much of an issue.
I understand, thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Stanley.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if the original PDR went out to a tendering process. So if a tendering process occurred prior to this point for the PDR.
Through the chair, no.
Thank you.
I see no further questions, so I'm going to call the question on the motion. All those in favor? All those opposed? Thank you. There's another motion to be discussed. Trustee McKay.
I'd like to move the motion that the Business Committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District 68, Nanaimo Lady Smith, direct staff to award the contract to Bradley Shua, Architect, Inc., for the design and construction supervision for the Woodland Secondary School renovations, supplementary to the seismic mitigation project, Solera Elementary School, subject to funding approval and the successful negotiation of a service agreement.
Okay. Can I get a seconder for the motion? Trustee Robinson. Trustee McKay, would you like to speak to the motion?
Nothing.
Trustee Stanley.
I'm just going to speak to this motion because we didn't get a chance to make comments on the previous, which is, it's not that I don't support these projects, it's that I really do think that we need to uphold our best practices in our tendering process just because it is a safeguard against risk. So I'm concerned that if we, sidestep our best practices when it's convenient, then we're not engaging in a process of this decision-making body of ensuring that our decision-making process is protecting the school district and avoiding those kinds of, and again, I'm sorry, nefarious business practices sound so exciting and dangerous, but things do happen that aren't necessarily above board, and so I don't want to imply that that's occurring, but the reason that these processes exist is to ensure and protect that they can't occur. So I just want to speak in support of that tendering process. I assume the vote's going to go exactly the same way as it did before, but I want to say this so we can put out there that in the future I think that this is a process that I value and I would like to see occur. So I'm speaking against the motion, but
Can I just clarify, Trustee Stanley, did you mention that you hadn't got a chance to speak to something? I just wanted to, did I overlook you speaking to something?
Sorry. Yes, kind of, not really that important. I mean, I would have liked to explain why I was voting no previously, but I can tell the will of the room. And the reality is that I can see and understand why these projects would move ahead. So it's not a clear-cut situation. So I'm not concerned that I didn't get a chance to comment. I just am taking the opportunity to do that, to speak to my point.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss you on that.
That's kind of you. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Trustee Barron, Brozovich, Keller, and did I see another hand? Higginson. Thank you. Trustee Barron.
Thank you. Could you clarify for me, because I'm trying to understand. In the previous example, you had said that Herald Engineering sort of had that understanding of the project, that it would delay it by going through another process. And could you speak to Bradley Shura Architect Incorporated? What have they done to date in this project that makes them the best fit for this project and for it not to go through this tendering process?
Through the chair. So they've been involved in the team right from the very beginning. So they were part of the SPIR, or Mr. Shia was part of the SPIR. So he's been, and that team did a fantastic job, in my opinion, of getting it to the point where we've actually managed to get the funding through the ministry. So he's been intimately involved from the beginning. So this is just formalizing the hiring of him to do Woodlands. At this point, you can correct me if I'm wrong, he's not being hired to now look after the seismic project. That'll be taken care of by Herald Engineering at Solaire. This is to hire him to help us develop Woodlands for the swing space. But he's been right from the ground floor up. He's continued on this journey to get to this point.
Thank you. Trustee Brozovich?
Thank you.
I think it's on.
I am on. Yeah, I was on. I was also going to say that I also have the same concerns about the tendering, and that was why I didn't support the previous motion and am leaning towards not supporting this motion. But I will ask a question. BSA, when they were hired as the architect, was there a tender for that? Do you recall?
Through the chair? Mm-hmm. Typically, we try to hire the architect that did the construction of the school originally.
Okay.
So unfortunately, I can't tell you whether or not they had actually worked on the original school, but that's typically how we hire architects.
Okay. Thank you.
Trustee Keller?
Thank you. So the position that I find myself in with this is that I don't feel that we've been given an adequate, detailed information to make an informed decision on whether Woodlands is the right choice for a swing space. And for that reason, I can't support the motion.
Thank you. Trustee Higginson?
Thank you. So I came into tonight as well with some questions about why woodlands. It kind of came out of nowhere, to be honest. Like, we haven't seen anything about it. We haven't had a discussion. But I am satisfied tonight with the information that I've been given. We do currently use Dufferin for a significant amount of workspace. You know, it's providing revenue through us through the Montessori program that is in there. So when I then stand back and do another, 50,000 foot level about what empty buildings we have that would be a good use, this is a good central spot that has really good access to public transportation as well due to its location close to the hospital. So I am in favor of using woodlands for swing space. I am also, I share the concerns that have been brought up around our tendering process. Having said that, I don't think that my concerns at this point, based on the information I've been given from staff, are great enough to vote against the motion, but I would like us, knowing that we have 22 seismic projects on the go, to maybe come up with a process that the board is open and comfortable with and has been part of deciding on the next steps, because I do suspect that we are going to be in a position where we're going to have to making some quick and fast decisions. And I also understand that the ministry is very interested in making sure that when they give us the money, that it gets spent promptly, so that money's not left on the table each year to put people in positions of surpluses that are, that look strange, even though they're not surpluses. So I'm hoping that going forward as a board, we can address this process as part of our, long-range facilities plan for the board, the background information and work that we need to do to support timely seismic upgrades. So I'll vote in favor of it and do want us to address this going forward.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to call the question. Seeing no more further discussion. All those in favor? All those opposed? And actually, just have to talk to the secretary. So I didn't. Because I didn't actually raise my hand in the vote. Okay. Trustee McKay?
Chair, I'd like to request a recess for 5 minutes, please.
Okay. And do we vote on?
It's a privilege motion, it's not getting.
Okay. Thank you for that. I could use a break, obviously. business here. We've got the Director of Finance, Tanya Sutton, to present on ministry enrollment projections. Oh my goodness.
Okay.
Yeah, we probably don't want to skip that one. See,
We're ready for budget. If you're ready. Okay.
We're ready.
Dale, do I need to turn this on or is it on? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so tonight I'm going to walk you through the changes in budget from the annual to the amended. Then I will take you through the ministry document from Schedule 4 straight up to the bylaw. And we're going to start with the operating fund. So we are on page 57 of 78. Oh, 57, sorry. So since the annual budget, we've seen additional enrollment of 176.733 student FTE. This provided for an overall increase in our provincial operating grant of 3.249 million. In addition, we also received $67,920 for our CUPE Standardized Extended Health Plan. We received $8,000 for NOE grants. We had a reduction in our federal funding for our Indigenous students, status living on the reserve, that are going to our schools. So we dropped funding by 106,813, and in discussion with our Director of Indigenous Services, we've determined that's approximately 13 students, but still to be determined. So that affects our funding that comes, they take it away in our operating grant, and then the federal government sends us money for that, so that's reduced accordingly. We, as previously brought to the board, reduced our ISE international student revenue as target students has not been reached, and we updated our rentals and lease revenue, and not for any specific purpose, but to align with the last couple of years of the revenue that we've actually received compared to where budget was. So just a realignment there. So overall, our increased revenue is 3.14 million in the operating fund. Revenue in the operating fund in total is 140.077149 million. Our revenue received to date at 45% is a little lower than what it would be this time of year. However, timing of putting this report together, revenue for January, some revenue for January, and some expenditures and staffing due to payrolls not being completed in January, we're just a little under where we would normally come in at this time of year. It's just solely due to timing. Increased expenditures of 2.913 million are due to, go to the next one if you want, on page, let's take you to page 59. So an overall increase in the operating fund of 29.635 FTE. And most of this has been brought forward, if not all of it, in November. But most importantly to note that our EA FTE increase, the 19.27, is a substantial increase, predominantly due to the number of designated students that we're seeing. Quite a large increase this year overall. Still determining whether or not that's a outlier or if that's an ongoing trend, but significant increase. And then our increase to the other categories, as noted, indicated there for you. One of the things I wanted to point out is the substitute cost is showing as a negative 581, almost 82,000. And that is directly related to the Classroom Enhancement Fund, where we all know that we've been supplementing that 10% that we didn't receive from the operating. Now that that has been confirmed and moved back over into the Special Purpose Fund as we've received it, the supplement is no longer required in operating, so it's been moved. That negative is due to the remedy that was removed from the operating grant, and it's been moved over into the Special Purpose grant. So just looks a little odd there, but that would be the reason for it. And then the changes in supplies and services, again, most of these brought forward already mostly restricted surplus being added in, the increase in FTE out to schools, and so forth. On page 60 of 78, we move to the special purpose budget. Overall, this budget is 19.476290 million. We had an increase of 2.4 million, predominantly due to the Classroom Enhancement Fund being approved and funding has now flowed to us, so the extra 1.9 million there. We also received a mental health grant for 26,500. The Changing Results for Young Children Early Learning Framework grant, 15,000. Some increased after-school sports, arts, and initiative money, and then our deferred revenue, etc. So that was a total of 2.4 increase overall. Percentages, one of the lowest ones in showing here is 34% in the Classroom Enhancement Fund, and that's due to the fact that they did not approve that funding until late in the fall. So we had been receiving very little up to the point that the approval came forward, and now funds are flowing to the district. And again, the 21% for the substitutes showing in the expenditures is due to the fact that remedy is not payable in September, and January payrolls had not been processed yet. It's payable at the end of the month. So it's going to be a back-loaded, not more a front-loaded expenditure there. So overall, again, 19.47629 million is our special purpose budget overall. Page 61 of 78. So this will be discussed again when we get to the bylaw. The reason I put it here is because the bylaw consolidates all three of the funds. So you lose sight of us showing you the operating revenue, the special purpose revenue, and you see that rolling up into the bylaw. So that was the purpose of this. Also showing you the overall FTE, as that is also on the bylaw. So overall total revenue, 165,505,533 million. Expenditures, now this includes special purpose, operating, and capital. Our overall expenditures of 168,701,676. Our net revenue of a deficit of 3.196143 million includes a small operating deficit of $140,111, which is mitigated through the transfer to local capital and the budgeted appropriation of restricted surplus to a net zero. I'll discuss again when we get to the ministry document. So then we bring in the appropriated surplus, and the balance is the 1.719032 million. So that is a total of our capital revenue that we are going to recognize this year, the investment income that we are going to recognize, the transfer of operating to local capital, less the amortization of our capital assets. So again, only in the capital fund. So I'm going to take you to page 51. All right. So on this schedule, we are budgeting a couple of key pieces. These are the amortization of our deferred capital revenue and our amortization of the assets. So to offer some information here, our capital contributions from the ministry are tracked by ministry and the district over the course of our operational years. Our capital assets are also tracked by ministry and by us over the course of our operational history. Capital assets have a useful life attached to them, depending on whether they're buildings, lands, equipment, and they have an amortization percentage that they depreciate or amortize every year. This is directed by ministry. So you have revenue that you receive for the purchase of assets. It's a requirement that you recognize the revenue as over the life of the asset, and you are depreciating the asset at the same time. Okay, so we are saying that we have, I'm probably confusing you now. I'm trying to get detail, but I'm trying to give you an understanding as to the differential between the two. So let me go there. So earlier this evening, they were discussing Hammond Bay and the fact that there's a local capital component to that, which is 1.25 million. Ministry is going to give us up to 16, I think it was 16 million for the project, thank you. So our capital contribution is the 16 million. The asset will be 16 million plus 125. So our amortization of the asset will be higher than what the capital contribution was, because there is a non-capital component of that, our local revenue. So that's why you see a differential between what the revenue is and what the amortization is per the ministry's tool of applying the percentages and the life and the revenue that we have to recognize to the matching expenditure over the course of this year. So that's what we're budgeting for, which is the difference of the 3.156032 deficit as the expenditure exceeds the revenue. We are then going to bring in our local capital income. We are then going to bring in our transfer from local capital, leaving the overall fund balance of the 1.719032 million, which, as previously discussed, is the only deficit in this budget. I will take you to page 40. Sorry. I will take you to page 48. So the schedules, Schedule 3 is a consolidation of Schedule 3A, where the detail behind the special purpose lives. So all of the salary and benefit and supplies and services detail is rolled up into the schedule that shows you again that the special purpose fund is 19.47629 million, as is the expenditure. There is your balanced special purpose fund. I will take you to page, actually on this one we're going to start with page 45. So now we are in the operating. So we've done the capital, we've done the special purpose, we're now into the operating fund. And we are back to the overall operating expense of 140.21726 million. And this is broken down by what Ministry calls object. So this is down by the individual staffing components, the benefits, and the salary and services. It then is presented on the next page, 2 pages from now. Then we move to the next page of 44, and that breaks down the operating revenue. So the revenue presented here is by source per ministry. I can say to you that under the first part, the other for 15693 is the FSA grant. And there is another category, other, and it's a bunch of small items rolled up into that. The inquiry grant is in there, House of Learning grant is in there, Art Start grant is in there. So it's a bunch of smaller grants. So overall, 140,077,149 million of revenue. On page 43 of 78, revenue and expenditures together. So the expenditures over the revenue, leaving the deficit of 140,111. The transfer to the local capital and the budgeted appropriation of surplus balances that fund to zero. Page 42 of 78. This schedule will roll into the financial statements. Sorry, I'm getting tired. But it starts with our accumulated surplus at the beginning of the year, which were the figures on our fiscal 19, so at June 30th, 2019, these were the balances on our financial statements. That's the opening balance. We then show the operating deficit of $111. We show the capital deficit. We show the two transfers. So this is saying the budgeted accumulated surplus at the end of the year is going to be this. However, the financial statements will indicate what the budgeted surplus is. These are just the figures that roll up from the other schedules. So they are the budgeted figures at this time. They are not what the restricted or what the surplus is going to look like at the end of the year. Actuals need to be rolled in for that. So on page 41, this statement, again, this statement is only half of what it would normally be on the financial statements. The statement reports planned spending to acquire our tangible capital assets, building, land, equipment, and so forth. And it is a change in net financial assets or debt, and that is our assets less our liabilities. There are no liabilities on this statement. This is just to facilitate the numbers here against the financial statements that you'll see at the end of the year. So again, it's rolling up figures into the statement. Starts with the surplus that we saw, or the deficit that we previously saw of the 3.196143. It brings in our acquisition, which is our technology, and the capital that we intend or budget to spend this year, the amortization expense. And again, this figure is premature because it will be on the financial statements presented at that time. On page 39 of 78, we start off with the funded FTE, which again, overall increase of 176.733. This is now a list of our consolidated revenue, including special purpose, operating, and the amortization of the deferred capital revenue for 165,505,533 million. Our expenses, including all three funds, which also includes the amortization expense, 168,701,676, which is the surplus deficit previously shown. We bring in the appropriation of the surplus, and we are left with the capital deficit. The bylaw on page 40 is only expenditures. It is the total operating expense, the total special purpose expense, the capital expense, the expense of the capital assets, which we were going to purchase from local capital, which is our technology, for an overall bylaw of $170,023,676 million. So that is it in a nutshell. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much for that.
Are you all asleep?
I found this report really well done and easy to follow, so I appreciate that. And I will entertain questions. No? Perfect. Okay.
I was going to move recommendation, but
you go ahead and move it.
Right. That the business committee recommends that the Board of Education School District number 68 in Ladysmith give all 2019-2020 amended annual budget bylaw during the February 26, 2020 open board meeting, and that the business committee recommends that the Board of Education of School District number 68 in Ladysmith adopt the 2019-2020 amended annual budget bylaw during the February 26, 2020 open board meeting.
Seconded by Trustee McKay. Okay, did you want to speak to the motion?
I think that it's a very good explanation. It makes a lot of sense to me. We know we have to have this done. The numbers are the numbers, and so yeah, good report, makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Any questions? Dave? All those in favor? All those opposed? Okay, carried. Thanks again, Tanya, and just rolling right into your next presentation here. Oh, we did those.
Is it budget calendar?
We bundled those two motions.
Okay, so budget calendar is on page 63.
Oh. Just says two motions. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, perfect. So we're budget calendar, yes?
Yeah, draft budget calendar.
Okay.
Yes.
So this draft has been put together mostly to up.
Sorry, there was minutes.
Oh,
sorry, my bad.
I'm sorry.
Hold on. Let me come from here. Okay, so it's so you're doing the ministry enrollment projection.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
So 65.
8.3 on the agenda. It's part of 8.2. What is the heck? Can I see clarification here?
I can understand why, if I may. Under 8.2, bullet point second one, it does talk about the 2021 budget, or the draft budget calendar, but there's no motion associated, so we skipped over that because we went to the motions.
Gotcha.
So that's why it's included.
Okay. So, So what we could do is, if you would like to do that presentation, we'll go to that and then follow up with the ministry enrollment. Okay. So this is what happens when you're like 3 times on the agenda as a presenter, Daniel, right?
Okay, so budget calendar 2021. So this draft has been put together for a couple of reasons. One, there were a great many of administrative items within the historical calendar, and we wished to create a simpler version. And we also wanted to update and align our format and process with other districts in the province. So this is a draft that has been put in place for discussion.
Trustee Higginson.
Thank you. So, in place for discussion, so I'm assuming that means that we can provide some input into the draft calendar that's here? Okay, so there's a couple of things that are missing here that I would like to see us add. One is a student input session. They're the best. So it would be really great if we could have a student input session into our budget where the students, particularly since we've just passed a new strategic plan, so there are some other areas that we're looking to address. So I find the student input, the student forums very informative when it comes to our budget. I'm also wondering about the placement of the thought exchange survey. It goes out on April 1st. It closes sometime between April 1st and April 22nd. But we get the thought exchange feedback at the same time as the proposed budget. And my concern with that is, I get that we get it in time to look at it in comparison to what's been proposed, but my understanding in the past, we've always done thought exchange quite early on because it helps inform the creation of the proposed budget. So having that community feedback in the creation of the proposed budget, I always found was a valuable way of informing what the community wants in our budget. Rather than it being reactive, it was proactive, and so I'm just wondering if there's a reason for it being changed, or I always preferred it to be earlier, so it helps inform it. And also, is there a time where we are meeting with, or staff, or someone is meeting with our First Nations communities? Is that happening through Leaders for Learners, or when will that be happening? Thank you.
Do you want to answer the first part of that about, well, I can, sort of, through the chair. Good point on the student input session. We can put that in. The thought exchange, so we're thinking maybe that could go out sort of pre-March break maybe, and then we can get feedback that would, good, we can do that. And then a suggestion of taking it to Leaders for Learning as well.
I gotcha.
And we can do that.
Well, not necessarily, it doesn't have to be Leaders for Learners. Maybe that's where you've built it in, but I wonder if we're having consultation with our Indigenous communities and rights holders on our budget.
Oh.
Yes. Well, it's not here. We're going to all of our stakeholders. Yes.
Yes. Sorry, Trustee McKay, response? Yep.
Thank you. I just wanted to share that in our Leaders for Learning meetings, we are talking about the budget almost every month. So it's an ongoing conversation, and then I would expect that we would layer in other factors, other ways we're talking to our rights holders and our other partner groups as well.
So I've got myself on the list here, so just follow up. I guess adding the student input piece, would that not be incorporated or could be incorporated into the thought exchange process, I'm thinking?
Well, through the chair, it could be, but I think there's some value in pulling in some student leaders and talking about the budget.
Okay.
I think it's the suggestion, and I think it's a good one.
Okay. Trustee Barron, and then Mr. Sphere.
Thank you. A thought and I guess a question that interconnects with Trustee Higginson's question around the thought exchange survey and the response by Superintendent Saywell around us moving it prior to spring break. I know last year when we did a thought exchange process, we had expanded it due to the fact that it fell over the summer months. And I'm wondering if that's something that we should be considering through this process as well around our level of engagement that we might receive during spring break.
Well, yeah, through the chair, that's a consideration. We're running out of time a little bit here, right? So it's either one or the other, and I would leave that to the board. We could get it out as soon as possible, or we could keep this calendar, this agenda.
Okay, I'm going to move through Mr. Sphere.
Chair to the committee, let's put it forward. Partner group presentations, and I guess I don't know if that's who that means to, but if you're doing the actual budget estimates after the fact, if I'm presenting, what am I presenting on? Pie in the sky. It's a real question. Like if there's a motion to make something different in the budget, and I'm presenting on, what am I presenting on? If I have no needs or no idea where the board is going in what direction. Usually present after you've seen something so that you can actually defend or ask for some different direction, but to present on what?
Fair, I'll defer to maybe Ms. Sutton if she has a response to that. I'm not sure where it was last year.
We could look back, but I appreciate your point. So I don't see that it would be an issue to move those, or could we move them? So the estimates to the 1st and the partner group presentations to the 8th, would that work?
If I could for myself, if I can, for myself, it works better to know what we're dealing with than to present on what may never happen, because you don't know what it's going to cost.
Okay. All right. Take that as a yes. And Trustee McKay?
I would prefer to keep the budget at the business committee and have the presentations at the open board meeting. That's just my thought on that, because you have the information but be able to present to the board.
Sorry.
Rather than putting finance into our education agenda.
So you mean the 26th? Sorry.
Partner group presentations would be the open board meeting on the 22nd, with the presentation of the preliminary budget on April 8th. That would give partner groups a couple weeks with the proposed budget in order to then build their presentation.
And I had Trustee Higginson, Trustee Keller, and then I'm adding myself to the list.
Thank you. I also, I find that budget time is also a really good opportunity to help educate the community on our budget. And I'm hoping that part of this process includes sort of the usual handouts of, the quick facts, snapshots of the budget, where you talk about sort of, like how much is put toward, like what is our revenue, and then how much is put towards staffing, and how much is put towards administrative spending, and things like that. It helps the community see that even though we have $147 million, we have actually not $147 million, because a lot of it is allocated. So I hope that there's a little bit of, we've done those snapshots in the past with the awesome graphics from our communications department, just to help. And I would like to continue that process because I think it's a really important part of the budget process for the community to see what our budgets look like, if we can.
Trustee Keller?
Thanks. Thank you through the chair. So just thinking about stakeholder or now student input, would we consider, maybe this is not the correct financial literacy term, but basically a goal-based budget where we are working with our stakeholders to identify what their goals are and then use that to inform our decisions?
If I may, I believe that we are fully focused on doing just that through the operational plan. And so it will be laid out of what in the budget supports the operational plan.
I have myself on the list. Do I see any other hands? So what I would like to suggest is that yourself, staff, take this away and bring it back with revisions to the February 26th meeting. Or perhaps we can review in advance. And I'll just recap what I've heard, and if I missed anything, and maybe this will be of benefit to yourself. The educational component, so engaging with students, as well as an educational component to engage with the community through our budget process. Doing the thought exchange earlier on, talking about March break, or just in advance of that, allowing more time for our partner groups to respond to the actual components that have been presented. So it's looking like that could be the 8th or the 22nd of April. And that's sort of what I've captured there. So do I see any other points to that? That works?
Yeah, I'll just respond. That works great. That gives us all great responses to the draft, and we can take it away and bring it back on the 26th. Yeah, great idea. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and sorry again for the confusion. I realize that it's because we have two calendar items on the agenda tonight. So, the next, and I'm going to get this right this time, 8.3, ministry enrollment projections.
65, that's 78, is that correct? Yeah, no, the action sheet. Actually, honestly, probably even this. That's on the financial planning. So, once we have our preliminary numbers into the ministry, then at September 30th, when we have our 1701 data collection, we get our actual numbers. So if we are projecting high or low, the adjustment would be made when the actual student enrollment is calculated. So we use Barrigar Systems, which is a software solution used prevalently throughout the province. and we then do some very careful analysis. Very important that we ensure that we are not over-projecting. To be in a overfunded situation is a massive risk for the district. It was timely that KPMG was here tonight because that's one of the things that's top on my priority. Actually speaking with a colleague a few days ago, found themselves in an overfunded situation of $600,000, and that is very difficult to recover from. So Beauregard is a useful tool. They do a great deal of analysis as to incoming and outgoing people into the community, births, a huge amount of demographic analysis. We then take that information and determine what it is that they are suggesting that we are going to increase by, and we determine where we're comfortable, because not necessarily are we going to see those kids, and if we don't, we will be in an overfunded situation. So it is safer and more prudent to find a somewhat conservative approach, which is what we do. We also need to convert the head count, which is what Beauregard bases their projections on, into funded FTE. We are actually lucky at this district. We did some analysis not long ago, and where we used to say that a grade 10 to 12 was doing 0.975 is what their course base equaled. It's 0.125 for course. So they were averaging 0.975. We're seeing now that they're actually closer to 0.955, in some cases over 1, actually 0.0 FTE. So the conversation about whether we were going to go into a headcount base versus FTE funded in the funding model review was actually interesting for us to see that we would have been less impacted at our secondary level had that been the case. We also do, though, have distributed learning, and at our DL we have, for reference purposes, 536 headcount, which actually equates to 197 FTE, because you've got so many people, but yet they're taking what they need, and so there's a big differential there. So the data from Beauregard we have to apply to our own organization, and what we know are specific factors that need to be analyzed internally for historical trends and just what we know of our own district makeup. So in this case, we are suggesting this year that we are going to see an increase in our K to 12 of 174.698 FTE. I will also add that interesting this year, and it actually will speak into our long-range facility planning, that our elementary schools that have been seeing a great deal of growth are still growing, absolutely, but not to the volume that we saw the last couple of years. Where we're seeing right now is our grade 7 cohort, which is a very large cohort, is moving into secondary. So for the first time in a little bit, we're seeing some numbers enter our secondary schools that we haven't seen for a bit. So there's a bit of a shift happening there. We're seeing K intake larger, not necessarily as large as last year, but still an increase in enrollment. So we are being a bit more conservative at the elementary level than we are at the secondary level. But again, overall an increase of 174,698 in the K to 12. You do see some adjustments of the May, the February and the May enrollment, and that is to align those categories with what we've seen of historic trends. In our initial enrollment estimate to ministry, we do account for, there's 3 data polls in the year. The big one is September 30th, and then in February we have one that collects newcomer refugees and new designated students to the district that have yet to be counted for, and we get half funding for them for the balance of the year. So it's important that we don't overestimate that as well, and not try to, because if we don't get that funding in February, but yet those students come into our district, we need to ensure that we're not projecting early and then finding ourselves in a pinch later on in the year. So these needed to be adjusted a little bit, which is why you're seeing the minus 17.5 for an overall increase of 144.573. And the next 2 years are full-on Beauregard. Again, K to 12 is slightly conservative. And then our special needs categories we're careful with. This year, as you can see, our level 1, 2, and 3, 469, that's an outlier we've not seen yet before in our district. So to assume that that's going to roll over and the amount of money that's attached to those designations is not something we want to just assume that we're going to see next year again. So what we do with those is we look at what our grade 12s are that are moving out of our schools, and we look at where our trends have been, and we try to be very careful as to what we want to set up staffing so that it's appropriate for our students and make sure everyone's got the supports that they need, but we want to be very careful that we're not overfunded. So that is the enrollment estimate in a nutshell. That will be submitted to the ministry on February 14th. I can't think of anything else to add, but welcome any questions if you have any.
Thank you. Trustee Higginson?
Thank you. On page 64.
Okay, so you're looking at the actual ministry document now? Okay.
I just don't understand.
And I went backwards, so I need it up. Okay. Okay.
So in the 2021, 22 year, under the change from previous year, so why is it different between district and ministry? Can you just explain that? Yes, I don't.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
So we as a district are trying to be fiscally responsible to our district, to our students and so forth, so that we're careful as to not find ourselves in an overfunded situation. Ministry, on the other hand, is trying to say we need to prepare ourselves for what the worst case scenario is, so we can ensure that that's what we're going to Treasury to ensure that we've got set aside. So we're on the opposite side of the spectrum.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Trustee Barron? No.
Thank you for the explanation around this information here. Could you expand on what you were saying around, in February, there's half funding provided for, I believe you said newcomers and new students that come in, which leaves us in a deficit or a negative 17.5 on the bottom. So I guess, could you clarify, okay, there's two pieces of this I'm unclear about. First of all, is it that way because we're only being funded for half, so then we end up having to pay for the other half, which leaves us, I don't understand that part. And the other part I don't understand is, how would we even estimate moving forward what that would look like? It seems to me like that would be a difficult number to estimate who's coming in the middle of a school year in comparison to at the beginning of a school year, where there'd be, I would assume, estimates that could be a little bit more easily calculated.
So this is all historic. This is all based on what we've seen year over year over year. So the reason that that we are adjusting them at this point is because over the past few years, this has just been a number that's been, these estimates for February and May have just sort of rolled over year to year to year. However, I'm seeing that they are too high. And so what they are is they are new courses. So there's a couple of categories. So when I say half funding, I'm sorry if I was confusing. So what it is that our level 1, 2, and 3 designated students, we get funding in September for everyone in the house. Any new students that come into the district after that September 30th count has happened, we pick them up in that February data collection. So then we're given funding. And when I say we're giving half funding, I just say if we get $40,000 for a level 1 student, we're getting $20,000 in February, because we're only needing to support that student for the balance of the year, is what ministry is suggesting. So they give us a prorated amount for those designations. They also provide us a prorated amount for any newcomer refugees to support the ELL. And then we also pick up any more continuing ed. So if individuals are doing more core spaces that weren't picked up in September, they are picked up in February and again in May, so that we get that funding. So what we were seeing is that some of the numbers that were being rolled over year after year after year were a little high for what we're now actually seeing. So we track budget actual, year over year over year, and we're seeing they're a little bit high. So last year, we actually, I think we actually lost just a tiny bit of money in February. We were okay in May. But because you're projecting, like you say, now for then, you want to ensure that you're not going over what you're seeing on a consistent basis, at least an average. So the numbers were too high, we need to bring them down.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Trustee Higginson?
Thanks. I gotta circle back on page 64 again.
Okay.
So I understand your explanation about difference, but on this, our projections are higher for 21-22 and 22-23 than the ministry's.
Yep.
And is that just because it sounded like the sloppy accounting thing that I don't understand?
No, that's, you know what, I asked myself the same question. I can't answer that. They have their own way of doing their enrollment projections, and I would have to phone them up and say, why? Because we did actually bring down Beauregard ever so slightly, because we don't want to assume that that's what's going to be. You know, again, Beauregard every year, you know, it changes every year due to the landscape. You know, we've got all these builds out here. We have no idea what they're going to yield. We could suggest that they're going to be young families with school-age children. They could be families with babies, and we're not going to see those children in our school for 5 years. They could be university students. They could be anything. We don't know what that yield is, but that gets picked up year after year after year. So what we see today in our projections with Beauregard and what we're going to see next year after our data is collected and all the stats are brought in the province, it will again change.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that, Tanya.
You're welcome.
For the information and in-depth presentation. We're going to move on to 8.4 of the agenda and invite Superintendent Scott Saywell to report on the draft school calendar, which I understand there is a loose paper. So this is a replacement to the one that you will find in your agenda.
Yeah.
Am I correct on that?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, yeah. Yeah, so through the chair, on page 68, you'll see the 2020-2021 school calendar. This new edition has one little thing I'll talk to you about in a second. There's only one change. In accordance with the School Act and based upon discussions with the NTTA's Joint Committee, Nutsmut-Tatalat, staff has approved the attached local school calendar for the 2021 school year as outlined in the School Act 87.01 school calendar. The board will give notice to the parents of students enrolled and the representatives of employees of the board. 30 days notice is required, so we would like to put this calendar out to the public for 30 days. It needs to be into the ministry on before March 31st. One of the suggestions, I believe last year, was that we should look to other districts, particularly Parksville, and ensure that our spring break lined up with Parksville's spring break. So we have done that this year. The sense was that many employees live in the Nanaimo and work in Parksville and vice versa. And so we've done that. Finally, if you look at the blue sheet of paper, the school calendar, there's just one change, and that is the online learning, Island Connect Ed. The change is that the vacation in August will be from August 17th to August 28th. It was previously from August 3rd, I think, or 4th. Yeah, August 4th. So there's a change there, and that is approved by staff at Island Connect Ed. Questions?
Trustee Higginson.
Thank you. So the reason, I'm just curious to me, maybe it's my parent hat on, not my trustee hat, but why do the kids come back from March break, and maybe you just answered it, they come back from March break and then go straight into 2 short weeks of school? Can we not adjust March break to have it include Easter, or is there some reason like contractual, or is it just to have it with Parksville? It just feels strange that they come back from 2 weeks and then have 2 short weeks of school.
Yeah.
Parent connection there.
No, we're on opposite sides.
Well, through the,
Go ahead.
yeah, through the chair, we have to fit the 2 weeks in, right? And we look at a variety of things, as does Untitled. And one of the things was aligning with Parksville. We align with a whole bunch of school districts on the island as well, most of them, yeah.
I just wanted to clarify that it's not Untitled, that's the committee that
Oh,
makes the
it's a
recommendations on the
calendar,
boogie, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that a hand, Trustee Barron?
No,
Okay,
thank you for asking.
that's a hand. Trustee McKay.
I'd like to move the motion that the business committee recommend that the staff make the attached draft 2020-21 local school calendar available to the public immediately, and to report back to the March business committee meeting with recommendations.
Okay, seconded by Trustee President. All those in favor? Okay. All those opposed? Carried. Okay. I'm giggling because I think that Trustee Prezovich has seconded most of the motions tonight. You're just right in that perfect line, so. Questions? That's the next piece on the agenda. Correspondence referred from regular board meeting, none. Unfinished business, we had moved that. So any new business? No? Or more? Questions? Did any questions come in tonight? Okay, I'll seek a motion for adjourn. Oh,
Yeah, adjourn.
that's your adjourning hand. Okay, thank you.
There you go.